What's going on, guys? It's Red Bull Tanker, and welcome back to Axis and Allies 1951 Europe, turn 11. Alright, this has been quite the interesting turn, so let's get rolling. Alright, coming down to the calendar, it is now December 1951, and as I said before, once you get into the winter months, sea zones 3, 4, 10, and 11 are considered frozen, which means no naval units can move in, move out, and no sea lift into ports that are considered frozen. Random event. Well, this one was interesting. So initially on the random event, we rolled a 10 again. So like the rules in Operation Unthinkable, if you come down to the next line and you roll the same number again at any point, at that point you don't re-roll yet. You go up to the top row and see if that random event had happened already. If not, then you do that random event. So I guess in response to Paris being atom bombed, the city of Kiev has been atom bombed by NATO or by the Allies. So Kiev was atom bombed. 2 Russian infantry were lost, and the factory was damaged. Was max damaged at 6. So not good for the Soviets. Not good at all. And then the streak of losses continued for the Soviets. For this time, for the initiative, it did not go the Soviets' way. The initiative role went the United States, NATO, then the Soviet Union. So the Soviets' luck with the initiative has given out. So, all right. So first, we will go to the United States, who had 67 to spend. They bought 6 infantry, 4 of which are being flagged under the 90th Infantry Division, and 2 that are being flagged under the 6th Infantry Division. They bought 2 self-propelled guns, 2 tanks being flagged under the 5th Armored Division, and then a jet fighter. Combat. Alright, seeing as things look to have stabilized, were looking to be stabilized in Europe, the U.S. redoubled its efforts to open up a front in the Middle East. So they took their forces from Cairo and took their forces from Tunisia and launched an attack on Transjordan. There were 2 cruisers and a battleship for offshore bombardment. However, only the battleship hit, killing 1 mech off the bat. And then in the ensuing combat, the Soviets lost 2 more mech and 2 tanks, and the U.S. lost 3 infantry, 1 of which belonged to the 92nd Infantry Division, and 2 that belonged to the 36th. Next, the B-47 did a bombing raid against the Caucasus factory again. The AAA missed, and the Americans scored 6 damage on that. And then the B-29 out of Rome once again came here to Istanbul, survived the AAA, and scored 4 damage on the factory there. Non-combat, the U.S. basically sea and airlifted the majority of their forces here to Cairo. Once again, now the 41st Infantry, the 86th Infantry, and the 9th Armor, along with 2 AAA, are now backing up the forces in Cairo. The 41st was split. 2 of it was reflagged as the 43rd Infantry Division, so the two regiments of the 43rd Infantry Division and 2 self-propelled guns on this transport came over and landed in Tunisia. While up in the north, the the 2 tanks and infantry moved into Turnen. The 2 tanks did absorb the 1 armor division from, I believe it was the 11th, and they are now all flagged under a fully strength 10th armor division, and then the infantry still represents the 97th infantry division. So that was it for non-combats. They didn't move their airborne or air transports out of Berlin, though Berlin does now have a card because several NATO forces found their way in. And then at the end of the turn, the US collected 67 plus 1 that they saved for 68 IPC. NATO. Alright, NATO was out for revenge this turn. They had 77 IPC to spend. They finally, at the request of the Americans, finally repaired the naval base here. The naval base is here in Turin. So now the naval bases there are all well and good. They put 2 mech and 2 tanks in Holland. Put 2 airborne in Belgium. They put 3 infantry in London, and to cause the Soviets more grief, NATO built an air base here in Murmansk so they could at least try and maybe receive some airlift support through these winter months. Combat. Alright, there was only 2 things of combat. First, the forces in Murmansk came down and captured Karelia. So that has now fallen to NATO forces. And then, once again, NATO drew up as much of its power as possible and assaulted at Hungary, which, even though the Soviets went first and they didn't anticipate it, the Soviets only had 2 tanks that were guarding 1 fighter and 3 tactical bombers. So the NATO armies went in. They killed the 2 tanks, the fighter, and 3 tacticals, while losing 2 mech, infantry, and a self-propelled. So they went in with 2 mech, 2 self-propelled guns, 2 tanks, and then 3 fighters and 2 bombers, and that's what came out. And then, again, the casualties for NATO were 2 mech and a self-propelled gun. Non-combat. Like I said, NATO moved some forces here into Berlin. They airlifted 3 infantry from London into Berlin. They moved a mech and 2 tanks from Holland into Berlin. They brought their fighter back to Berlin. They brought 2 fighters back to Berlin. Brought their 2 bombers back to Reims. This fighter from Belgium that took part in the Hungary battle only had enough to get back to Austria. Sorry, bless me. And then they moved the 2 mech and 3 armor from Rome up to Austria. And then they took the 2 self-propelled guns and 2 tanks from Paris and brought them to Turin. They took 1 mech from Holland and put it in Stettin, while taking the infantry from Stettin and putting it in Breslau. So at least NATO can form a line here against any Soviet thrusts back into Germany. And then at the end of the turn, NATO collected 88 IPC. Alright, the Soviets. Alright, the Soviets had 98 to spend. They spent their money on repairing the Caucasus, repairing Istanbul. They put 2 airborne in Greece, an infantry and a tactical bomber in Romania, 3 tanks in Warsaw, a mech and 2 tanks into Leningrad, and 3 infantry in Moscow, especially now that there is that threat to the north. Combat. The Soviets only had 1 thing of combat this turn, and that was to attack the NATO forces in Hungary. There were 2 infantry in Romania, a self-propelled gun, and a tank in West Poland. And then they used 3 fighters, 3 jets, and a strategic bomber. They went in, they finished off the NATO forces there at a loss of 2 infantry. Non-combat, these 3 infantry were railed from Smolensk to Hungary. This infantry came from West Poland into Slovakia. The 2 tanks and self-propelled gun from Warsaw came down here to aid them. They moved their 3 fighters back to Slovakia. They moved 3 jets back to West Poland, and then their strategic bomber back to Warsaw. They decided to pull out of the Middle East, leaving a mech behind, but putting up a lot of their forces here in Kars. And then the Soviets railed 2 infantry from Leningrad over here to Molotovsk, and then just moved over 3 infantry and the 2 Marines here to Novograd. And that was it for their non-combats. And then after the deployments, at the end of the turn, the Soviets collected 84 IPC. Well, that is going to be it for turn 11. This game might finally have turned around for the Allies, and it looks like the Allies might finally be able to get the squeeze on the Soviets, especially now the Allies are going to have a front in the Middle East. They're starting to push a little bit here in Eastern Europe. And unless the Soviets can get the initiative, the Allies are going to be able to start building up, bringing in reinforcements by air into Murmansk, which is going to cause issues up here as well. Whoa! I dropped my pointer, but I didn't mess up anything. All right. Well, that is it for turn 11, and we will see you guys next time for turn 12. So until then, guys, as always, take care.